This is Sunday over here for May 20th, 2018. I'm in Nairobi, Kenya, and for Sunday over here, I pretty much go out, I get the newspaper, if there's a newspaper where I am, I read the headlines, I read an article in it. Today I'm going to be reading the Sunday Nation here in Kenya, and there's a story in there that I'm going to check out. I'll let you guys see it after reading the headlines on the cover. So getting right into it. Okay, as I mentioned, this is the Sunday Nation here in Nairobi, Kenya. It's only the Sunday Nation and the Standard. I saw both of them. This is the headline story right now. On the Standard newspaper, it had an article here at the bottom, and then this top half was a picture of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Is not Meghan. I don't know what. I guess her name is right now. I don't know what's his last name. Windsor. I forget. Okay, so they got married yesterday. Britain's Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, and his wife Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, waved from the Ascot Landau carriage during the procession at the Castle Hill outside Windsor Castle in Windsor after the wedding ceremony yesterday. So this was a big deal for some people. A lot of people watching this. Some of you may know, or some of you may not. Kenya was a colony of the United Kingdom. It was a British colony, and they still have close ties with it. English is one of the main languages spoken here. It's English and Swahili, and then there's 42 different tribes with their different tribal languages. But the two main languages are English and Swahili. When you get a situation, sporting-wise, the Premiership, the Premier League, that's the football league from England. That's the top sporting league, I'd say, here in Kenya. The local leagues are starting to get up there. They're starting to compete with them. But when it comes to international, people are like, yes, Chelsea. Somebody was like, mini Chelsea Wadamu. I was hearing this on the radio. They're like, that's in their blood. And that's the kind of thing I'm wondering. How do people get that connected to something that's not even in their country in that sense? I understand you growing up in an area. I had an experience growing up in the Washington, D.C. area and having a certain affinity to the Washington Redskins. That's the American football team in that area. Since I would watch it when I was out there, people would wear the Redskins gear to be on TV. There's advertising. You hear the name Washington. You have the familiarity with being in the DC area. There's something like that, and I get that growing up in a location and having an affinity to it. And I think I'd say when you look at countries, look at fan bases, 50% or higher is people who are just fans because that's where they lived. Now, when you get to something like being a fan of the Premiership, of the Premier League, and it's also the same teams, you don't find a lot of people who are fans of, like, Leicester. Although Leicester is the one who won the other day, right? Like, Hull City or something, Hull City, is that the team? Something like that. You throw me like Tottenham, Manchester City, Manchester United and Manchester City, Chelsea, Everton, Liverpool, Arsenal. I guess that's like half the top teams. Yeah, and then the other teams kind of go in and out, so you don't necessarily see. So I'm wondering, how does somebody get that close connection to a team where they say it's in their blood? Now, when it goes further to something like this royal wedding, I'm going to get to that more, probably to see some pictures in here, to see kind of what the coverage is here, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions or some thoughts that came out, because I was thinking something going along with this coverage of this. But anyway, so other article on this header, on this cover page, front page, cover, headlines. That's it. That's the word, headlines. Miguna is own worst enemy, declares Raila. So this has been a story that's been going on pretty much since I started the series. Raila Odinga was the head. This is horrible cropping of this photograph, by the way. If I was doing this is really bad. Just the way it's filling it. No, it's not good. But anyway, so he was the head opposition person, and he lost the election, the presidential election. Then he was doing a resistance movement, and he was leading the opposition people. He had his own inauguration, a people's inauguration, and said he was a people's president. And then a lot of the people who were supporting him kind of didn't show up for that, and that thing kind of dissolved. And then a few weeks later, or like a month later, after that whole inauguration of his own, he ended up having secret meetings with the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, had a handshake, and now since then, that happened, I want to say like a month and a half ago, probably a little longer than that. they've been doing this kind of now he's trying to jockey himself for positions, get into positions of power, get into a certain location, because the way it happens here in the government, if you lose a certain thing and you're running for president, and a lot of the people who jump on with you, they're running for the presidency, they're running to get in. So when you get in, you set up your whole administration, and if you don't get in, most of the people who were on the opposition side get frozen out. So now that he's getting back in there, people are jockeying for position and wondering how he's going to get in, how he's going to get out. Now Miguna, right here, there was some really it was an international incident with him because he left the country for a while. He was under he was under threat of being arrested. Then when he came back, he was at the airport. They took his passport, and there was a fracas at the airport with the police kind of trying to lock him down. Then he was stuck there. Then he had to leave the country since he didn't have his passport or something. He was stuck in the airport in Dubai, and now he's come back. And then pretty much now he used to be, at least he was close with Raila Odinga, at least supportive in that side. And then now he's saying ODM leader blames fiery lawyer for the immigration woes, but Muguna terms the assertion scandalous falsehoods, accusing party boss of abandoning him. Now this is going on. A lot of people are going their separate ways. The whole opposition structure system is kind of crumbling now. Okay, let's see what Muguna said here. I asked Miguna, why don't you give the passport to be stamped? Oh, I don't have a passport. As I sat there, Miguna refused to cooperate, and they took him inside. So this was the thing. When Muguna came to the airport, I think he was in Canada. He might have dual citizenship with Canadian citizenship. He came back, he was at the airport, and Raila Odinga had gone to the airport to meet him. So I guess this is some news of things that are happening during it. See, opposition chief breaks silence over the deportation of Saga. So they're just talking about what was happening with that. Now, I think another reason they're trying to jockey for this position, there was a previous newspaper sometime this week talking about how there's like 14 billion shillings or something being taken towards pensions and monthly salaries and giving staff for these people for certain, calling them VIPs, for certain politicians after they retire. So it's very lucrative to get into that position. So a lot of people are jockeying to get into that position. So even if they're not running for power later on, as long as they can retire from politics while being in power, besides and not just being kicked out, any extra years you put on the docket adds more money at the end. So I really am not too pleased about that situation, but that's for another time. But okay, right here. Police now summon 40 over National Youth Service scam. So 9 billion, the amount said to have been paid to ghost suppliers of the National Youth Service. The National Youth Service is kind of like, if you guys in the United States of America, the ROTC, which is I don't know what the ROTC stands for, but in my experience from high school and things like that, the ROTC seemed to be kind of like a junior, lower kind of entry thing into the military. It's kind of like the mix of the ROTC for younger people, because the National Youth Service, but it's also older people. I mean, it's people in their 20s. I think it's from like their teens to their 20s, even up to their 30s. Here in Kenya, they have this horrible thing of saying, oh, I'm a youth politician. The guy's like 50. So this National Youth Service could go as high as like in 35s and things like that. So think about like National Guard, ROTC and kind of things like that. That's the kind of thing that it is. So there are investigations into the shilling 9 billion scandal at the National Youth Service took a dramatic turn yesterday with revelations that police had summoned 40 people for grilling ahead of possible prosecution. Director of Criminal Investigations, George Kinoti, this guy right here, said he had assembled a strong team of detectives to take the statements as scheduled to appear in the headquarters of Kiambu Road tomorrow. So this is just the continued battle against corruption here in Kenya and trying different ways to curb it, and still 9 billion and things like that is going by. I think I've had some personal experience with some state-run agencies here in Kenya. The postal agency went there, and I was just wondering, why isn't anything digitized? And I think when you digitize certain things, it's harder for you to just have things disappear. If you have paper, you can be like, oh, we just didn't write it down, or oh, you just pocket this paper and put it over there, or oh, yeah, you signed something saying I'm paying you 6,000 shillings for this thing, and it's on a paper, then that person, before they actually file it into the thing, they change it to 3,000 shillings, and then they pocket 3,000 shillings out of it. Whereas if you had a digital system, then the people know, like, okay, this box has come from this country, we've weighed this box, we've put it in, the calculation has come in, it says it's supposed to be 3,000 shillings, we print out a receipt. Then when that receipt is printed out, it's given to the person, or it's sent to the person's phone, and the person has a trail that way, and that person just sends you the money directly through mobile money like M-Pesa, or gives you a credit card or something in a way where just the money goes directly in there, and then it checks off the receipt, and that way you can't have a situation where somebody can come in. You still can. There's still got to be people finding ways to get corrupt in that situation, but it cuts down some things. So I think there is some of that going on, and I think that's one of the biggest steps that needs to happen to kind of curb some of the corruption that goes on in Kenya, because a lot of things are still just done on paper. Okay, the article that I wanted to read, and I'll see if it's like a double-page article, I might just skim some parts of it. But on Happy Birthday as Nairobi turns 119. I've been talking about how young developing countries are. Kenya is about 58 years old. Now, Nairobi is turning 119. That's the capital city of Kenya here. And these are some of the... I saw this Kenyatta International Convention Center. It's been used in the background in some mangas and stuff. I think some mangas are like the comic books in Japan and things like that. I think they go online and find different locations, or maybe they go on vacation, but they see these things like, oh, I can do a skyline, but I can pick like an African city or something like that. And it's going to be a skyline, a realistic skyline, because I'm using actual source, but it's not going to be picked up that much. So if you're doing like something in like an invented creation of yours, that's kind of a good idea for things to do. But anyway, so Nairobi turns 119. So the city has been going. And there's been things going on in the history of the city. So there's certain things about certain structures in the country that are older than the country is itself. Now this happens in a lot of countries. But as I mentioned before, Kenya was a colony of the United Kingdom. So they kind of established Nairobi and a few other cities and a few other things before the country even became independent. So kind of the transition going over for that. So sins of founders haunt city as leaders struggle to restore glory. Now the sins of founders. Now I wonder if they're going to be talking about the founders like way back in the United Kingdom days, or are they talking about the founders of the nation Kenya itself, because that's a different thing. Like Uhuru Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta is the current president. His father, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, was one of the founders of the country, and him and a few other people, even Raila Odinga's father was involved in that. So you have this situation where you still have the people who founded the country itself, the freedom fighters, their families and their kids are still actually the ones running a lot of the things, at least getting positions of power. So kind of imagine if you're in the United States of America, if you had people like George Washington's like son or things like that were still kind of the president and things like that. So that's kind of something you can kind of think of. So let's go and see what happens here. Page 2 and 3 here, and then page 12. So we're going to just go to page 2 and 3. Right here, you can see the different things of the weddings. And the question I wanted to ask you guys was, let's say you're in the United States of America. Right here, it's saying, America approves this message. Who cares? Nobody cares. We don't care if you approve the message. Marriage is going ahead anyway. One thing, Meghan Markle apparently half black. One of my friends was pointing out that this guy Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, he's a rapper. He had this song come out, "This Is America," made a lot of hits. I have a video talking about that. Like, I'll post that later. But anyway, so people were talking about that, and then black women were coming out and saying, "Why is his wife? His wife is pregnant. His wife is white," and people were like giving him crap for that. A lot of black women do this. It's a common thing. But then now, with with Meghan Markle, first of all, again, ignoring the fact that she's half, because with President Obama, no, he's black. People trying to say I don't care, but apparently she's American, right? But anyway, so now they're like, "Yas, queen." This is what my friend was saying. Yas, I hate that term, yas. But they're like, "Yas, queen." Like finally, we have an American black princess or whatever. So I don't know, but this is the kind of thing we're talking about here. Apparently, let's say let's say we just admit that, yeah, she's black, whatever. Even if she's not, this is what I'm saying. Even for me, the better part is realizing that some of these people aren't. These people are a mix. These people are showing. Is that the mom right there? Yeah, that's the mom right there. So you see, this is the thing. These people are showing that people can come together and mix things together and create something else. This whole thing of pointing out, oh, she's just black. I'm like, why? I'd like pointing out the mixing part and more than the fact that it's just someone. but that could just be a personal bias of mine. Well, anyway, the coverage of this thing, I did not watch it. Some people here are being asked about it, but it's a big major thing. Now, politically, if you have, I don't think politics are completely separate from the way people's personalities are. My idea is if you're conservative, you probably care more about your own country. You care more about the things going on in your country, in your neighborhood, in your area. Things that are interesting with that, those are the things that you're interested with. So if you're in the United States of America, if you're Kenyan, somebody in the United States of America had asked this, like, okay, she was like, I'm a conservative and my liberal friends seem to have a lot more interest in the royal wedding than my conservative friends. And she was just pointing that out. And I was thinking, okay, first of all, there could be some projection thing where some people on the political left kind of project and think like, yes, we can be princesses and princesses also. Princes and princesses, we are royalty in our own way. Things they would love to have that kind of old royal decree thing where whatever they say goes. And they often say that, I feel this way, do this, I'm not giving you reasons for it, just do it, let it be done. My word is writ law. That's the kind of situations they kind of go with. So taking that aside, I was just thinking the conservativeness, the liberalness. If you are conservative in the sense of the United States of America, you kind of care more about the United States of America. You care more about things in there. So if you're liberal, you don't really care as much about local things. Liberal people are more like globalization, open borders, other countries are better. Don't be proud about America. What is Americanism? So it makes sense that they would be kind of proud and happy, or at least more interested in other people. Even going aside the whole like celebrity thing, because they also do like celebrities and things like that, seem to be preferred more on the left, celebrity worship and things like that, than it is on the political right. Although the political right has its own celebrities, it's just they're not entertainment celebrities, not music celebrities, different sorts of celebrities. So, that was one thing that I was thinking that's part of why you have this. And I think a good way to tell would be to see, do conservatives in the United Kingdom care more about the wedding, about the royal family, than the liberals in the United Kingdom? I think they would, because they would be like more proud about their own peoples, about what's going on there, whereas the liberals would also have that same kind of mentality that American liberals have, where they're like, United Kingdom should, let's not have the Brexit, let's not have our own independence, let's be part of this entire European thing, let's let in other people in, let's change our Britishness, whereas this is something that's very British, this is something that's very uniquely United Kingdom, this is very patriotic in that sense. So I can imagine the conservatives in the United Kingdom kind of caring more about their royal wedding than the liberals in the United Kingdom, whereas the liberals in other countries would care more about the wedding in the United Kingdom than the conservatives in those countries, because those conservatives would be more interested in their own country. Does that make any sense? So anyway, let's come here and see what's your view about the event. So Mr. Joseph Mwaniki here. It's the fault of media for wasting airtime to show Kenyans a mere wedding, which, in my opinion, is of no importance. There we go, Joseph. Sorry over here. I don't think the royal wedding is the most important thing. What matters is to invest in love on to the person one loves. So I think it's a good thing. I mean, a lot of people in the media are talking about, like I said, I didn't watch it that much, but a lot of people have been talking about how there's a denigration of marriage in the West. And I think this is kind of good to show this marriage, even though it's been paid through like some kind of taxes. And I know the Windsors have their own actually, it's been found that right now with the amount of stuff they own, or whether you want to debate on how they came to own it, but the royal family, from the things that they actually have in possession of the royal family, actually are not a net negative to the British economy in the way that it's done. So in that sense, you can say, okay, is it really taxation that's funding them, or are they kind of just now just working off of the things that they already have? So you can argue whether they should have those things to begin with, those sources of income that they should have. But yeah, let's come back to John Wairimu. Yes. The wedding is just a waste of time and resources. They should have used such money to help the poor. So this is another thing, waste of time and resources. In some cases, what poor? What poor, how far should it go? Should it be the entire Commonwealth, everybody involved in the United Kingdom? I think let them have their wedding, let them have their pomp. I don't really understand why some people spend so much money on weddings. Even this month, this is probably millions and millions of dollars to have this wedding. So that might not be for me, but I'm not anymore somebody's like scripture. Like, if you want to spend that money that way, I think it's kind of better to kind of have a situation where you have like a small kind of reception, a small kind of thing with close family and things like that. And then maybe you put some money aside to get a house or save for something in your life, and then you go forward, and then maybe 5 years later you have like a bigger kind of event after you've had some marriage experience and memories and things like that. Maybe you have some kids by this time. You've built your friends and family. The friends who have been there for you during the marriage can come there and appreciate that thing in a different way. And then you also know there's like, it's more like a celebration of the marriage and things like that. I think that would be kind of a better thing to do in this. I'm actually going to be attending a wedding soon. It's not going to be necessarily like that, but my best friend's doing it in a smaller way, and it's something we've been talking about for a while. So anyway, with the weddings, what do you guys think about weddings? You think it's a waste? You think, but that whole like save the poor thing, no. They could have not done the wedding, not spent that money, but on the wedding, but it doesn't mean they should give it to the poor. Or who's the poor? And some of the people who are these quote unquote poor that she's talking about might be a lot more wealthy than she is. I don't know how wealthy she is anyway. But what does she mean by the poor? And also some of those people who are poor that she's thinking should get this are also the same people who are lining the streets and very happy, and these kind of sorts of people who are very happy for this wedding to see this thing, like, yeah, yes, queen, that kind of those kind of people. Okay, let's see if we can get 4 for 4 on people who don't like this thing. And Jangi. It is expensive but very exciting to have such a wedding. The royal wedding was fun and colorful. I wish mine can be as good. You see, like right now, yeah, she's talking about how, yes, it was expensive, but it was fun. I guess it was worth it in that way. And okay, I guess it can be good in its own way, but it's not going to be a royal wedding. just excuse me. Expectations, ratchet them a little lower, a little lower. This is just an observation we're going to make here, saying whatever, but the whole like hairline thing being really far back is a really odd thing to me. Yeah, anyway. So let's go now to the actual article that I wanted to talk about, the one about Nairobi, Kenya. Being 12 years old. So here we go. That's kind of a long article. Let's see how much of it we're going to read. Might just jump through it, jump around different places. So people, power, and politics. Attempts to right the wrongs of the founders. Attempts to right the wrongs of the founders were frustrated. So unhappy birthday as the city of Nairobi turns 19 years old. So away from poor leadership. Nairobi's woes go back to its very beginning when it was established on a flat, marshy land. Some 119 years ago, next week, Nairobi was born. Not as a town, but as an obscure railway depot. The only flat place remaining for the railway engineers as they prepared for a complex climb up the Rift Valley escarpment. The Rift Valley is kind of like the Grand Canyon. It's one of these major rifts of different continental plates kind of hitting the place. So I was kind of thinking, like, I was just reading some article recently, and it was talking about, I don't know if it was an article, it was talking about a different fault, not the San Andreas fault, but a different fault on the west coast of the United States of America that actually might be a lot more dangerous than the San Andreas fault. There's a lot more risk of actually going active and creating earthquakes that could actually break off the west coast, at least part of the west coast, from the continental United States of America. And they're talking about the other kind of rifts in the world. And I don't know if I'm tying that in with a manga that I was reading where something happened to the world and then it really changed the kind of layout of the world, and it was affecting the different rifts and different valleys and different fault lines, and the Rift Valley is one of them. It's a very beautiful place, though. So here we go. Well, here's a picture of the railway station in 1899. Kind of cool. Anyway, so back to this. So to all those thinking that President Uhuru Kenyatta and Governor Mike Sonko will solve Nairobi's problems, use your bet for something else. Nairobi has bigger structural problem, and the best they can do is kickstart the process. So Mike Sonko is, as I said, the Nairobi governor. So Nairobi is a sad story, but all is not lost if we get the right leadership. Okay, the right leadership here does not necessarily have to be the state. I think this is a situation where people should look more to what they can do, but maybe they're going to set that up in this. Let's see where it goes. So Nairobi's problem started in the afternoon of May 30th, 1899, when the Uganda Railway reached mile 327, and the name given to this depot by engineer Sir George Whitehouse as he prepared for the arduous task ahead of building a permanent line up and down the escarpment. When Mr. Whitehouse selected the site, he never consulted any medical or sanitary authorities to check whether it had proper drainage or if it would be suitable for a large and growing population. The problem was that nobody thought the city would ever emerge here, and that engineer Whitehouse was, and engineer Whitehouse was least bothered with what the Indian tenderpreneurs, the likes of A.M. Jivanji, and traders were doing behind the back of the railway administration. So I guess they're talking about different things that were happening behind without the people knowing about what was going on. Givenchy Gardens, some of these names are things that I see. Like I said, the country's still very young. So a lot of things that will be named out there, you'll hear them and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I guess that's why this place is called Givenchy Gardens. That's why this is this and that. So yeah, here we go. So is this Mr. Whitehouse? Whitehouse. The White House was he named after the White? No, he was not named after the White House in the United States of America. But anyway, getting back to this. So Mr. Jivanji, who would later donate Jivanji Gardens, right there, to the people of Nairobi, had been given the contract to supply labor to the railway and is credited for shipping thousands of Indians into Kenya to work for the Imperial British East Africa, the company collecting taxes for the British government, to the Uganda Railway and to work for his company. AM Jivanji, which had had been given the contract to build government offices, railway stations, post offices, as well as supply foodstuffs and railway construction materials for that. The Indians in Nairobi respected Jivanji, and he led them to agitate for equitable treatment. Now, this is how a lot of the Indian population came into the United States of America during this. I'm not sorry, it's not the United States of America, but came into Kenya, and there's about, I think it's 750,000 to a million people out of the 42 million people are in Kenya, or 42 to 45. I'm not sure what the actual count is right now, but that's a small percentage of it are actually of Indian ancestry. Now, some, as you can see, have been here for over 100 years. Some are more recent, but these people are as Kenyan as any other person here that's Kenyan. I guess you can go back and people can say, yes, our ancestors have been in these lands for thousands of years, but at least these were people that were there before Kenya was Kenyan. So how can you really say like, okay, these people aren't Kenyan? And it's kind of a situation. So when you talk about immigration and things like that, other countries also deal with it in different ways. And I think these people consider themselves very Kenyan, at least from my small experience with them. I'm sure there's some of them who still have stronger ties to India. Some of them still have extended family and ancestors there. But some of these people who came over in this situation, part of the reason they were able to leave India and come to something like this, were they coming as workers. So it's a situation where they come out, and back then there wasn't that much travel and sending back money and things like that. Often it was a situation where they had no opportunities back in India, so they would come and leave everything and try something new here, and then they would establish everything they had here. But yeah. Anyway, Nairobi's having an unhappy birthday, and most likely, and as usual, there will be no celebrations to mark the event. Now, I don't know about having celebrations of 119. That doesn't seem to be here. Maybe you wait 6 years and have the 125, and maybe you can kind of make an argument for that. But anyway, so instead, residents will be agonizing about the deterioration of services and wondering whether they ended up in what was described by Mr. Whitehouse in 1898 as a windswept, desolate place. Nairobi has ever since been run on a trial and error basis, and Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko is continuing with a legacy of inept leadership and petty wars that have always been a part and parcel of the city. This seems to be a common thing with capital cities, at least major cities. So yeah, cities are not too much different everywhere. So I think it's not necessarily the people, in my opinion, it's the structure of the state. The kind of people who enter there, who have that level of power and impunity to order people around, are not necessarily going to be the best. It's going to attract people with not necessarily the best intentions. So yeah, from the very beginning, naysayers dismissed the location of Nairobi and argued that no town would rise in the middle of the Nika hinterland, without a waterfront or minerals. And they gave examples of Cairo, founded in 969. Yeah, that's a long time ago. Johannesburg, founded in 1886, and Cape Town in 1652. A story well told in Robert Maxon's autobiography of John Ainsworth, the founder of Nairobi. So, okay, with John Ainsworth, I wonder they're probably going to get into what John Ainsworth did because here they're talking about White House. So, White House was the one who started the railway station. The just railway station is not a city, so I think John Ainsworth now is the one who actually established it as a city. So, let's see what changes it from a railroad right here to a city. So, as the first administrator for Nairobi, Mr. Ainsworth was caught up in the daily feuds with the railway officials since his arrival from Machakos, where he was managing the bankrupt IBEA. I think that's the International Bank of East Africa. I don't know what the I could be. I think it's the International Bank of East Africa. He had apparently been asked to take up the position of the sub-commissioner of Nairobi and to coordinate the planning of the administrative center. All along, he had thought that Machakos was where he had planted. Sorry. All along, he had thought that Machakos, where he had planted eucalyptus trees and lined up some of the modern-day boulevards, would emerge as the future capital of a British colony. He was wrong, or rather, he was incensed when the railway engineers skirted the town, a move that killed Machakos' dreams of becoming a city. Now, Machakos is still a place. It's still. I feel like I've been there. It's close to Nairobi, but I can't really recall much about the place. But it's still. It's now come up to be a rather bustling area of bustling. What's the urban area? Yeah, it's coming. It's up and coming. Okay, and because of that, Mr. Ainsworth was always at loggerheads with the railway officials, and when he arrived and found that one of his IBEA officials, Francis Hall of the Fort Smith in Dagoretti, had befriended the railway managers, he transferred him to Machakos. In turn, Hall never hid his dislike for Mr. Ainsworth. He once wrote, "These fellows, brought up behind a counter, get too big for their boots and make life unbearable for others." Things don't really change. That's kind of the same thing. Like if someone's saying, "Okay, this guy's kind of bougie. This guy's just kind of, yeah. This guy hasn't actually got his hands dirty." Plane flying by. Is there an airport near here? I don't know, but planes fly kind of low here. So, and with such battles, Nairobi's growth and planning was stymied. What we know now is that Mr. Hall was a social snob too, and even looked down at Mr. Ainsworth's American wife, Inca, for the simple reason that Inca's sister was married to Mr. Hall's cashier. It was this contempt that would eventually see Mr. Hall transferred to the troublesome Muranga in 1900, where he established the modern-day town, which until independence was known as Fort Hall. But he only stayed there for 1 year and died of dysentery, age 32. He's buried at the little cemetery in Muranga town. So yeah, people are doing a lot of things. People were establishing cities in their 20s and things like that. You look at the founders of the United States of America, and they were very young. I mean, this whole idea of looking at people like, oh, our politicians are supposed to be these elder statesmen and things like that. Although I'm not really saying we should put the governments in the hands of like the youth right now, because there's some very look at some of the things they're arguing for. How much people embracing socialism, they shouldn't necessarily be thrown into it. But I think there's something that's changed with humanity in general. I think a life form, its youth is not necessarily set in years. Like if a life form is for example, a tree. No, tree's not a good example. Let's go with like a mammal, something to life, like a tortoise or something. If a tortoise can live like 120 years, then its youth, I guess once it grows to its full adult size, you normally say, okay, it's ended up growing. But I think humans are a little different. When you have a kind of society where your average age is your average death rate is at 40, then you're going to grow up a lot faster. You're going to be looked at as an adult a lot faster. Physically, I guess your body still changes. Your brain definitely still changes in your 20s. That's what they're saying. Your brain is still kind of forming I think for women it's by early 20s. For male it's like mid to late 20s. That's when the brain will stop forming. But physically, body-wise, I think people normally stop growing around 18, 19, around there. Some people have growth spurts after that, but normally most people have stopped their growth at that point. So if it's like adult body size, you've come to that point. So you get the situation where people are a lot younger, but I think now you have a situation where people are living longer, where youth is becoming a longer thing, where people are being treated as youth in certain countries up until they're 25, 24, like 25, mid 20s and things like that. And I think that's a change. But yeah, this guy died at 32, was already thinking bad things about Americans. So this is another thing, like Americans have had a bad rap. I don't think it's always been such a positive thing to be an American. So I think it's okay for them to have some pride in themselves now because you have some of this. There's a truck out there, so excuse the sound. I'm just going to keep going, and hopefully it's bearable. But they might move soon. I don't know what they're doing. Okay, actually, apart from the railway engineers, workers and the Indian traders, nobody loved this swampy site. Mr. Ainsworth had requested the railway engineers, who acted as the government, to allocate him sites to build government quarters and a trading center. He was allocated some marshy sites next to Nairobi River, modern-day Biashara Street, and parts of River Road. So Biashara Street right now is Biashara Street Business Street. So there's a lot of what's it called? There's a lot of like hardware stores and type of things like that. Hardware stores, fabric stores, textile stores, things like that on that street. Also automobile like section. So it's kind of like an industrial depot, industrial selling spot in Nairobi, Kenya. So you normally get things in bulk in large sizes. You don't go there for like, oh, I'm just going to buy like a t-shirt. You go there from like, yeah, I'm going to buy like 100 meters of fabric so I can go and make t-shirts. That's kind of the place that you do that in. And then those people get in touch with their people in the industrial area, in the factory, and then they get you the things. And they have some things on location, but I think it's mostly for sending stuff. But yes, the truck turned off, so that's positive. Let's see how much more we can read before it turns back on. Okay, nobody cared that about garbage disposal. There were no toilets, as Ronald Hardy recounted in the book Iron Snake. Nairobi's one was only remembered for its galleries of hut and hovel and stench. Sorry, I should do a better job of reading this. Try to read it through the screen. I'm wondering if I read it just directly on the newspaper or read it through the screen of what I'm recording with. Okay, so anyway, Nairobi was only remembered for its galleries of hut and hovel, the stench, and the garbage, and the fecal matter. It was no surprise that in 1901, thanks to tens and thousands of rats, a plague broke out in Nairobi, killing many traders. That was repeated in 1990, when a strain of bubonic plague broke out in Embakasi as a result of uncollected garbage, an indicator that we had not learnt any lessons in 90 years later. So I was not in Kenya for that time, but I do have some cousins who lived in the Embakasi area. I came back from, no, actually I wasn't Kenya at that time. I came back from Europe I was born in France, came back to Kenya in about 89. So yeah, I was there, and I had some cousins living in Embakasi. Do not recall this. I was very young at that time. But yeah, I'm glad my cousins survived. But they were living in actual estates, so maybe this was affecting more the people in the slums and things like that. But really? The bubonic plague broke out in 1990? That's pretty crazy. That's cray-cray. Okay, anyway. So the reason for such an outbreak was due to poor planning of the town. The first Nairobi committee, town members, was biased against the Indians and indigenous Kenyans and adopted differential treatment on the sanitary matters. Archival reports show that, for instance, the Indian bazaar was unplanned and filthy, and although Indians complained to the township committee, nothing was done. So racism is a fact. It's groupism. It's not even just racism at all. It's tribalism. I think we should take the race part out of it. It's very convenient to say it by race. But right here, as you can see, Mr. Hall was also a social snob, looked down on Mr. Ainsworth's American wife, Inca. Now, Inca, I don't think she was actually Incan or South American or mestizo mixed with actual Incans. I think that was just her name. These were probably white people despising other white people for class reasons. So this guy had his own tribe, had his own group, and was like, look, I'm in my group, I'm going to look down on you for certain reasons. So that does happen. And right now, a lot of Indians are being accused of the same kind of thing where they have their own in-group preference. I did say they're Kenyans. A lot of them, in my experience, feel like they're Kenyan, but they'll still hang out with the Indians. They'll go to they'll have their own customers, own cultures, own foods, and things like that, and they still continue that. Now, even within the Indians, especially a place like India with a caste system, where you can see if you're talking about racism and things like that, or groupism, saying like I'm going to look down upon you. In India, they have that ingrained in their society with the caste system, where you're born into a situation and you can't. It's situations where you can almost do nothing to actually bring yourself out of that. You're stuck in that caste. You're an untouchable for your entire life, and that's how you're going to die. That's how your kids are going to be born. You have to actually die and reincarnate, and then you can actually come out of that. That's a really odd situation. And if you're like a Brahman, who is a top caste, I think, then you're given a lot of leeway in what you can do. It probably goes into levels where this may not be codified by law, but I'm sure it's situations where if you're in a certain caste, you're going to get more loans, you're going to get more business deals and things like that. Where if you're in a certain caste, you're probably not even allowed to go to certain stores. You're not given access to certain things. So I think one positive thing I think about the United States of America has been that despite that, there is some actual level of able to grow and come out of those things. How the tribalism is not necessarily based as easily on religions or race or things like that. There's different ways to do it. And I think you see that happening more in cities where people come together and they grow up in environments where they meet and talk to other people. But often when it comes again to the weddings, like you see here with the Markle, with Meghan and with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, then you have a situation where when it comes to marriage, they normally default back to their original tribe that they grew up in. That's how I still see it normally happening. But yeah, anyway, so let's continue with this. So what was written about Nairobi more than 100 years ago, and the way it discriminated between poor and the elite neighborhoods could still make sense today. In poor neighborhoods, the filth is incredible. Garbage rots in uncleaned heaps, rats abound, meat and other edibles hang within inches of human order, and all of it stinks in the tropical sun. But as one crosses the stepping stones of the Nairobi River, this is today's Museum Hill Bridge, all is good and cleanliness. All is in good order and cleanliness, but again. It is evident that keep going with these like parentheses and things like that. Why don't you just have it in there? It's really rough to read. I'm already struggling reading, but then they're adding these things. So all is in good order and cleanliness, but again, it is evidently thought proper that sewage should run along open cement channels and into a river from which most of the population draws its water. Yeah, the Nairobi River is filthy. It's a mess. It's a mess everywhere. It's a mess in good neighborhoods because it's a mess in bad neighborhoods, and it's all shared by all people. And then people actually, some of the slums in the areas actually just are living right on the river. It's really a tough situation. I think that's something that people are trying to improve slowly by slowly. I've seen some work of people just going in there and just road grading everybody who's in there. It's like, yeah, we're giving you a warning, we're giving you like a month warning. You have to move your shacks from here. Or even like people who have built actual homes, mansions and things like that. It's like, look, we're trying to clear out maybe a 50-yard radius on both sides of the river and just do that. And yeah, that's something that is starting to happen and I support. Actually, back into reading. Actually, and unknown to many, Nairobi River was deliberately polluted with sewage. Does it surprise anyone that today's industries still pour raw effluent into it? It is no wonder that pioneer medical officer Dr. W.H. MacDonald was convinced that Nairobi was being built in the wrong place, or what the principal medical officer of East Africa and Uganda Protectorate, Dr. Moffat, described as dangerous and very defective. In an April 1903 report, Dr. Moffat regretted that the opportunity of the 1901 plague was not utilized to carry out this somewhat heroic measure of removing Nairobi from the plains. This is one thing I've wondered with a few cities. Now, back before it's established as it is today, why didn't they move it? Why didn't some people move from certain locations? I just pot committed, and it's something I was also wondering with places like New Orleans after the big flood. Hurricane Sandy, was it? No, it wasn't Sandy. I think Sandy was the one that hit New Jersey. Katrina, yes, Hurricane Katrina, when with Kanye West recently apologizing for having said that George Bush doesn't care about black people doing that. But anyway, that kind of situation. I remember hearing that it was going to be more expensive to actually rebuild St. Louis than it would have been to relocate it. But now that's like a full city, millions of people, stadiums, and things like that, long histories. But still, why don't you just like resettle? I wonder what percentage of the people actually resettled, or how many people actually decided some neighborhoods, let's just leave them, let's just let them go to grass, let them return to the marshland. Because some of those places are marshes; they're below the water table, they're below the sea level, and that's why when something like this happens, the levees break and water comes in. And Nairobi itself is a very marshy area. There's a few hills and things like that in places, but it's very marshy, and when it rains, water floods a lot. It's a big problem on the roads, still to this day. So that's one thing, yeah. They could have actually changed that, and they did not. So, back to the reading. A year after he wrote that report, another plague broke out in 1904, and the decision on what to do with this railway cum trading center was left to Major J.W. Pringle. McDonald's, Pringles, doing ketogenic diet right now, getting a little hungry with these names. An inspector of the railways who was attached to Nairobi's Board of Trade. He said, "As a station site, the level ground commends itself to a railway engineer. As a site for a future capital of East Africa, and for permanent buildings for Europeans, the sanitary engineer and the medical expert condemn it. Under this circumstance, I can not but urge His Majesty's government the desirability of further considering the question before the construction of numerous buildings of a permanent type pledges them hopelessly to the adoption of a bad site," wrote Pringle. So first of all, in here, His Majesty's was back when United Kingdom still had a king. It's been queens a lot, and this whole idea that patriarchy's been there. There's been no female power. In most of the European countries that I know of, that I can think of, they've been queens on a regular basis. Now, there may not have been a lot of females populating the governmental structure of those countries, even while there was a queen. But that whole idea that people are afraid of powerful women, that is haberdash. Yeah, haberdash. I said haberdash. Yes. Anyway, it's a fiction. I think it should be retired from the general lexicon, from the general what's it called? Just from general parlance, from people talking about it. It's not true. It's a fabrication. Okay, so back to reading this. But nobody listened in London. Oh, one thing. I'd let this keep. So. Permanent buildings for Europeans. So this is the thing. People have different standards. Here, the Europeans coming here were of a higher bent than the people coming here. So the Indians coming, they're like, okay, it's probably a better situation than what they had back home, no matter what they were getting here. And they were thinking, okay, this is the future thing. The Europeans were probably coming, and it was a lot of a step down from what the Europeans were like living like back in London. So it's a different thing with different things. You could say that was racist, just because at that point in time, most Europeans, 99.9% of Europeans were probably white. Probably some Moorish people and things like that, mixed like that. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens there. I don't necessarily think it's about the race. You look at the kind of Europeans that come here now, African Americans come here now to visit Kenya. They're going to be living in a different kind of situation than Kenyans. If you look at an African American, kind of what they think is a base level of life, like, oh, if I'm living in a life worse than this, in a household worse than this, I am oppressed, I am in poverty, and you look at middle class Kenyans, and they would look at middle class Kenyans and say, these people are living a life that I would never want to live. So this whole idea that saying, okay, it's built for Europeans, you want to say that's racist, then that's also the African Americans looking at the way middle class Americans live, Kenyans live right now, and saying that's something that they wouldn't do. Is that racist? I don't think it is. Anyway, but nobody listened in London. After all, they thought Nairobi would not grow to anything with its sanitation, rats, plague, and swamps. It is the same way we watch the city's chaotic growth with matatus and boda-bodas as part of the transport system. That kind of thinking and lethargy that was witnessed in April 1904 when Major William John Radford succeeded Dr. Moffat as a medical officer. Although he deplored the selection of Nairobi's site, he decided not to do anything because of the enormous expenses that would be involved. He wrote, "It is too late to entertain the proposal of moving elsewhere," he wrote. "Permanent buildings have been erected. Trade and other invested interests have arisen, all of which would demand compensation for compulsory removal. I do not consider the result gained by removal would be anything like commensurate with the expenditure it would entail." Okay, so that's being pot committed. We've got to the point where, like, okay, we can't do anything anymore. That was very early, so of course it's not really going to be done now. So, and that thinking was accepted despite protest by senior officials, including Sir James Sadler, the Commissioner for the East African Protectorate, who on May 18th, 1906, asked Winston Churchill to help resolve the problem of Nairobi. Although Sadler told Churchill, by then the Secretary of State for the Colonies, that Nairobi was a depression with a very thin layer of soil, and that the soil was waterlogged during the greater part of the year, it appeared that London had already made up its mind. Churchill wrote back and refused to make any decision. It is now too late to change, and thus lack of foresight and of a comprehensive view leave its permanent imprint upon the continents of a new country. And Churchill with his prose as usual. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. How many people who know about Churchill, about his exploits in the World Wars, the Second World Wars, know about this small little side aspect about his relation, being able to change Nairobi and decided to do nothing. But yeah, maybe if he just said one or two words, he could have gotten this thing through and it could have been a whole different world. But yeah, people do different things and happens in different ways. But any of these other gentlemen, these men, humans, could have done different things. Even Givenchy could have possibly done something. So yeah, different people could have done different things to involve this in. Okay, fast forward to 119 years later. Nairobi is still grappling with its leadership problems. It still retains its bylaws borrowed from South Africa and is the victim of a master plan of 1948, which was more about segregation than delivery of services. This was the kind of Nairobi that we inherited in 1963. And ever since the development of the road networks, lighting, water, and sewer systems still follow the income levels. And this is something that I can attest to. Wealthier areas are definitely, but this is the world. How different is this? So yeah, as I was saying, I was trying to think, where else in the world would this kind of thing happen? Where in the world is it where it's like, hey, we just kind of all live together? But I don't know. You look at a place like Switzerland, and I was hearing this thing about Switzerland, how they have this kind of situation where it's an entire decentralized government, where the federal government doesn't really make too many decisions. So it comes down where the different smaller cities kind of make towns and villages and things like that, have their own government, have their own zoning laws. They're able to know what the needs of the people living there are, versus having this centralized planning thing. I think during Obama's administration in the United States of America, there was this move to have these lower income housing divisions and things like that built in higher income areas. I don't think that necessarily helps. Here in Nairobi, Kenya, you have a lot of places where you have these kind of wealthier areas with slums right next to it. Like, I live in a pretty nice area. I'm privileged to live here, if that's a thing. Any kind of term that's defined as privilege, I do consider it some kind of privilege to be here. And yet, a kilometer away, it's a short walk away, there's still people living in corrugated metal homes. There's still people kind of tapping power lines to get their electricity, no running water, things like that. I see kids just the same way they're talking about here, how you have like effluence. You have just open trash and things like that right next to butcher shops, right next to people getting their hair cut. You have kids running around playing there. You have charcoal just over there. You have people doing like hardware stores like this in the street, kind of with sparks and things like that. Next to these piles of wood, people are cooking actual food. People are making mandazis, which are kind of these donut type things, or chapatis just there on the side of the street. And this is all happening together, where they don't really have a situation where they're like, okay, this is the kind of life that I would not live in. I probably would not be comfortable living in there. Pretty comfortable saying I would not be comfortable living in that kind of situation. Yet they are. If I go there and I'm like, no, you guys have to clean this up, you guys have to do it in this kind of way, or this entire street here, it's only for the hardware stuff, this entire area here, it's only for the food stuff, who am I to go there and enforce that? So maybe if they had their own situation and they could actually understand if that's kind of something that's working for them, I don't know. Find a way to sell that idea to them. But this whole idea of just centralizing it and saying, okay, we have to put these people together, I don't think that necessarily works. And it's a tough thing here in Nairobi, Kenya. As I said, with that situation, 5 million people living in Nairobi, Kenya, about that. World's biggest slum, I think it's still the world's biggest slum, is close to the center of Nairobi, Kibera slums. And then I think you add the 1 million people that live there to the other slums in Nairobi, Kenya, and it might be close to 2 million people out of those 5 million actually live in slums. So it's really a tough situation. And that's the kind of thing where when you have a situation where the politicians are getting billions of dollars or billions of shillings just for their pensions and things like that, whereas you have the gap that I've seen here, you see this gap everywhere. I think some people don't see it as much as I've seen it, but just seeing the people who are wealthy on a global level of wealth driving by the world's biggest slum, or driving by people who haven't even probably made, someone who's like 40 and hasn't even made $1,000 his whole life, and somebody is just driving by in a vehicle, it's probably $1,000 just for the insurance for that vehicle. That's like a kind of a semi-regular thing I see when I go out here, and I think it's also part of the reason I don't go out that much. It's kind of it hurts my mind to see that it's challenging both for me to appreciate what I have, but it's also challenging in a way that sometimes it gets me to be less critical or less demanding about things that are negative in my life. I'm like, okay, why am I complaining about this? Or it can be restrictive in a way. So let's just try to wind this down. The colonial bylaws that were anti-African and anti-business, and which were first prescribed in the notorious Wuthangai Township Committee, then an exclusive suburb of Nairobi's European community, are still in place. Slums have mushroomed in the city, and today we have more than 200 such settlements, holding more than 2.5 million people. Okay, there. It's actually I could have written this article. Anyway, no, I think it's just different things happen for the same reason. Mr. John Kamau here, writing a good article. Glad I read it. But anyway, let's get back to this thing. So more than 2.5 million people. Urban planning is alien to the city and operates without any master plan. The housing challenge, lack of basic infrastructure, especially sanitation, drainage, and access to energy and clean water, still dogs Nairobi 119 years later. There's these things, you see these blue trucks like written clean water on it, and they're often very dirty trucks, or they're very polluting, or they're just pouring water as they go, water leaking out, or the actual engines are just creating a lot of pollution from the exhaust coming out. And like, clean water, doing that way. So these things are delivered all over the place. So even in the wealthier neighborhoods, you're still getting situations where there's brownouts, blackouts. Just the other day, a week ago, I counted 10 blackouts in one day, in one afternoon. So it's kind of like, how can you actually get work done? Yeah, you can get a generator. You can get a portable, kind of a backup power system for your electronics and things like that. But it stymies things. So like right now you have that. Yes, I have my generator here, but if the internet service provider that I have is also on the actual thing and they don't have a generator, then when the power goes down, then even if I have my entire power in my house up, my internet service provider is not providing me the actual internet connection. Yeah, I can get a mobile thing, but now that's like, so there's a lot of things you have to consider going through. Whereas in the United States of America, you're going to have electricity. A lot of people who live in the United States of America have probably never experienced a power outage in their life, not directly attached to actual natural disaster going on, like a hurricane or tornadoes or some blizzards or something like that. I remember there was like a 2-day power outage in the United States of America when I was living in the Bethesda area. And I went over to my friend's house. A beautiful blizzard in 1996, I think it was. Things were covered, all the trees were covered with about like a centimeter of ice, and everything looked crystallized, and got to miss school, and it's a really fun time. Well, anyway, but yeah, so one thing that does happen is happening in Kenya that I was talking about with these planned things, is you get situations where closer to the city, as the city's expanding, as more people are coming to live in this area, people are like, okay, we don't want to live in the city proper anymore. Yes, the roads are getting a little better, so people are willing to commute, but they want more land, more space, and things like that. So they'll go out maybe 50 kilometers away from the city center, and they'll just get like 100 or maybe even a 200 or 300 square acre area and they'll just build maybe 300 homes there, and they'll have different kind of homes. Some homes will be 5 bedroom, some will be 3 bedroom. They'll have stores built there, so like a small convenience center there, a small like strip mall type place. They'll have a gym, they'll have a pool. Sometimes they'll have like a kindergarten or elementary school and things like that. They might even have like a small clinic. At least they'll have like a pharmacy and things like that. So they have these kind of situations where it's like, look, you can buy into this entire community. And I think this is a way of the future. I don't know how much it's going to be able to work in the United States of America. It might have to involve people abandoning areas and then like those areas being able to be bought out en masse by people and then brought back. This could also be a thing that increases with this mobile people being able to work remotely. You'll be able to work remotely, and then even if you're living 2 hours away from the city that you're in, if you only have to be in that city once or twice a week to check in with the main office, have some kind of meeting with people coming in from out of town or things like that, then it might make sense to have these communities where now in the smaller towns, in the outskirts of these mega cities in the United States of America, you can have those kind of massive kind of built-in areas. And those are kind of things that I think would be good. Now, when you have that kind of thing, there was this idea that I've had where it's like, yeah, in that area, in that entire city, you have your own laws, your own governments, your own governance. I have no problem with governments. I have problems with the states and the central planning. But if you have an area of 300 families and they decide these are the rules and the laws for you to live in this area, these are kind of guidelines. We want this kind of people. Even if it's a Christian community, like, okay, we want this to be a Christian community. We don't want to build a mosque here. We don't want like the call to prayer to be played here. So we're going to live like this. Or somebody's like, this is a Muslim community. We're going to have the call for prayer. If you're living here, just know that 5 times a day, there's going to be a loudspeaker playing this thing, and this is going to be expected. We're not going to have alcohol in this entire neighborhood, so don't go, there's not going to be a bar built, or don't have like a party in here with alcohol. Don't like let your kids come in and have like a big party here. Don't hold a reception to your wedding here and have like alcohol. We don't want that. So you can have that kind of situation where I don't mind that kind of living. I know that people might say that's going to reduce integration to the community and area, but as I mentioned, people are still going out to the cities to do certain things, so that might be a way of the future. I don't know if I think that's a positive thing, and if people want to do that together and they're not really harming other people in that sense, I kind of have nothing against that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about that. The truck turned on again, but we're getting towards the end here. Okay. To make matters worse, only 220,000 households in the cities are supplied with water, and although Nairobi Water Company pumps 550,000 cubic liters a day to the city, 40% of this is never accounted for and is either siphoned or leaks to the ground. Thanks to the aged pipes and illegal connections. Yes, this one I've seen. I've just walked on the side of the street and you see like an open hole with water just constantly going. And it's like, these places I've gone by repeatedly over years now, where it's like, I'll be here, then I'll go back to the United States for 6 months, come back and walk by this place. I'm like, oh, I haven't been down this street in a while. Let me go check it out. I walk back and the same open sewer with the water line is still there. I think I should develop an app where you just take a photograph and you send something and say, okay, this is a problem, and somebody gets the thing. There's a few ideas on this other accounts of accountability app idea that I had that's going to tie in to get the people to actually work on these things, where you can get the situation to streamline the process, where people can bid on like working on the area, so you don't necessarily have to do it. And the government is like, oh, for us to fix something, we have to do X, Y, Z, have a certain number of people to bid on it, put this thing. But there's a way to tie these things in where you don't necessarily have to let these things go by. Or you just have a thing where somebody just puts like a bounty. Somebody just puts up a thing and is like, hey, it's going to be like, if somebody can fix this, I'll put 200 shillings for somebody to fix this. Somebody else comes in and says, oh, yeah, I can put 100 shillings towards that. Then it gets up to maybe like 10,000 shillings. So 10,000 shillings is sitting there and it's like, look, if you can actually fix this pipe, just go there and fix it. If the fine from the government is something like 5,000 shillings for you to be fined for trying to fix something or something, or that's like the bail, or that's the ticket, or that's whatever, then if you're being paid 10,000 shillings for it, maybe you'll just go fix it anyway and take that fine, and then you'll still get 5,000 out of it. But yeah, that's just an idea. Shall develop that longer. And if you actually listen all the way here through this long video, getting towards the end, and you got some ideas. But I'm going to talk about those apps and things on a separate thing. But some of these things are ideas that I have, that I haven't actually lived somewhere long enough to actually establish them and start them. But I think just putting the ideas out there, maybe somebody else will pick up with it, or maybe somebody will get in touch with me. Yeah, and then we'll be able to actually get these things working. But anyway, So, in place of an organized transport system, which was in the 1948 master plan, has emerged a nightmare of matatus and boda bodas. The matatu system, again, I have some ideas on this. Simple app where every matatu driver or every conductor, the tout who's letting people on the bus, they are on a system where it's like, okay, if you are signed up on our bus system, once you show up to a bus station, let us know. Just check in at the bus station. Then they won't have to wait at the end of the line to fill up the bus. They'll know that if I leave now, on the way to town or to my location, I'll be able to pick up 20 people. So instead of waiting at the end of the line for 30 minutes to fill up the bus with its 40 people, they'll be like, I'm just going to go right now and get this route because I know I'm going to pick up people on the way. It's a simple thing that can be done. But yeah, it's frustration. Anyway, and back to this thing. As Nairobi turns 119, its problems are more than Mike Movie Sonko, and I can bet. And I can. Its problems are more than Mike Movie Sonko. That's the governor. I might pause to let this truck move if it's going to move. No, it's not going to move. As Nairobi turns 119, its problems are much. Sorry. As Nairobi turns 119, its problems are more than Mike Movie Sonko, and I can bet he won't solve them as long as Nairobi has no working master plan. We all know how Mayor Steve Magic Mwangi's attempts were thwarted and frustrated. But all in all, happy birthday, the city of Nairobi. So yeah, is this truck part of the problem? Is this truck supposed to be there right now? Do we need some central planner to remove this truck from here? But no, there's some construction going on here. There's people living there. So this truck could just be delivering that somewhere. There's also a university back there, so that truck could be going there with something in there. But this whole situation, maybe there's certain roads where that truck shouldn't be there. Maybe if you had these roads built in a certain way, they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go somewhere else. But that's the way things are, and one needs to stop. So yeah, that was it for this Sunday. Thanks for listening. I really enjoyed that article, and check in. There's going to be a playlist for the other ones that I've done on this. I'm going to try to keep these up every Sunday. Next weekend, I don't know what the format's going to be. I've changed the format before. Sometimes I just read the headlines or just flip in through the entire newspaper. This time I saw that article, and as you saw, the headline was rather sparse on like 4 headlines and things like that. So just touched on a few different things. Let me know your thoughts on the kind of things brought up in this. Did you guys know about Nairobi? Do you want to know more about cities? How much do you know about the city you live in, the establishment or the start of the city that you live in, or the town or the area? But yeah, so that's it for now. Like, share, and subscribe. If you can, help me out on Patreon. I have a Patreon below, even if it's just $1 or more. There's also a merchandise store selling different shirts and bags and things like that. I'm going to get some designs up. There's a design I want to finish up right now. Put up some of my videos. I can actually go with a video and actually do like a speed drawing of the design. But there's one design I'm doing based off of the This Is America video with Donald Glover. But anyway, so that's it. Goodbye.